Hey everybody, it's Rob. Welcome back to the channel. Got another episode of a look at the book for you here today. We are going back to the Gazetteer series from Basic D&D. This is Gazetteer number 13, and it is the Shadow Elves. So, like the other Gazetteers, this goes back to the end of Basic D&D, beginning of 1st edition Advanced D&D. And I love these books. The Gazetteer series are probably my favorite D&D books they've ever put out. They are an amazing resource for either playing in the known world as it was back then, or for stealing ideas for your own campaign world. We're going to take a look at what all comes in the book and who the Shadow Elves are a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what I think of it. Before we get started with that, if you like these kinds of videos that I do, whether it's on, looking at game books or reviews or toys or miniatures or whatever, the kind of stuff that I put out on my channel, please consider subscribing, becoming part of our community. You can also find me on Facebook at Rob's Game Group, all one word. I'll put a link in the description below. So I did the Dwarves of Rockholm a little while back, and I really like that one. I've used stuff from it for my campaign. I've integrated some of the stuff from the known world, which is, with basic D&D, that's kind of what the world was. It was the idea of it was introduced in the Isle of Dread module, and it was touched on a little bit more until they finally started putting out the Gazetteer books and taking each section of the known world and really, zeroing in and focusing on it and talking about either the kingdoms or the races that live there or what have you. And these can be pretty pricey on the secondary market to go get. You can get some of them through Drive-Thru-RPG reprinted, which is what I've done with the ones I wanted. There's still a few more that I want, but they are currently only available in PDF for some reason. They're not making them print on demand yet. I've heard that they cycle them out from time to time, so we'll see. But I definitely want to get the one for the Halflings and the Orcs of Thar. Maybe a couple of other ones too. They're just fantastic books. Like I said, back then it was just called the Known World, and it expanded into Mystara. Also, the Hollow World supplement took place in the known world, inside the known world. But the writing in some of these older D&D books far surpasses the stuff that's being put out now. And I'm not just bashing on WotC, because some of the stuff WotC puts out, the writing's really good on. But not up to par with this stuff. This stuff was fantastic. And it's also not laden with a ton of heavy rules, because Basic D&D didn't have a ton of heavy rules. It was a very easy, very simple game to play. That's one reason I love playing Basic Fantasy, and I use all this in my Basic Fantasy game, because it's basically it's Basic D&D with an ascending armor class instead of descending. There's a few other little differences, but for the most part, that's what it is. It's BECMI, and I like that kind of D&D. So this is Gazetteer number 13, Dungeons & Dragons Gazetteer, The Shadow Elves, by Carl Sargent and Gary Thomas. Let's see. This came out in 1990 and was a whopping $9.95 when it came out. Which, I don't know, 10 or 12 bucks, something like that. Actually, no, I think the print on demand of this was like 16, I believe. So, the Shadow Elves. Dark is the underworld. This is from the back of the book. Dark is the underworld. Darker are the lands of the Shadow Elves. Far beneath the rugged broken lands, even deeper than the deepest caverns of the trolls, live these pale-faced warriors. Their law is that of their immortal Raphael, and their mystical strength that of their soul crystals. Together they will guide people of the shadows to the lands under the sun. The Shadow Elves is the 13th in the best-selling Gazetteers collection. It provides an in-depth look at the culture, history, and goals of the Shadow Elves in the Dungeons & Dragons game world, including a 32-page player guide providing instructions on the creation and roleplay of Shadow Elf player characters, their cultural backgrounds and skills, a 64-page DM's guide with a complete atlas of the Shadow Elves' lands, new rules for shamans and their dark mystical powers, and a complete set of adventures. A large color map sheet depicting this great new world and the fabulous city of stars. And like with all of these print-on-demands, the maps are just included in the book. And then we see the city of stars breakdown here. I am going to at some point try to work out where I can do the camera over the book, but I have not mastered that yet. There's a lot of things I can do with this tripod. I just haven't gotten used to all of it. But we will get there, hopefully. So, I always find the setup a little bit weird in these because the player section is in the back of the book and the DM section is in the front of the book. And it even tells you it wants you to read the player section first. So it's weird to me that it's flopped around like that, but you know, it is what it is. We can take a moment, however, again to just, you know, adore this Clyde Caldwell cover art. He's an amazing artist. So the first thing I think I should point out, and a mistake that a lot of people make when they hear you talk about the Shadow Elves, not that there's that many people talking about the Shadow Elves these days, is they are not the Drow. There are a lot of people who just assume that these are some type of Drow, but they're not. They are, the only thing they hold in common with the Drow is that they are both elven creatures, and they live underground. Other than that, no, nothing. They are light-skinned, blonde-haired, or white-haired, but very pale skin, like you would be living underground because you're never out in the sun. But they are not an evil race. They do not worship an evil immortal or an evil god like the Drow do. They're not into spider fetishes. They have a strange society. So like they escaped into the underworld or the Underdark when Blackmoor was destroyed, and unbeknownst to them, there's I think it's beneath Blackmoor, there's the wreckage of the starship or the starship engine. Well, radiation from that has leaked out, and that actually ties directly into the Shadow Elves, because they don't know about it. They just know that they escaped Blackmoor when fire fell from the sky. So in the wake of Blackmoor's destruction, they fled underground, seeking out a new home, and they went very, very deep. And at one point, they found a city that was very Aztec in design and nature, and even the immortal that was residing there was very Aztec. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but it was a very Aztec-like name. But he was not a nice guy, and he was evil, and they didn't reproduce fast enough, and they would not do some of the evil things he wanted done. So he basically had a volcanic eruption and forced them out of that city. Now, neat little tidbit is if you read the Orcs of Thar, that city, the lava-covered city, is in that book because the Orcs took it over later on. So there's a tie-in there between them. There's also some tie-in between this stuff and the Principalities of Galantry. So we'll be looking at that book at some point too. The Shadow Elves eventually found this weird, massive cavern area. It's actually a lot of caverns. But there's a weird gravitational displacement inside the cavern So like about halfway up, the gravity reverses. So the cities are actually built like all the way around. And at any point, you can be on one side and look up and you see all the lights from the city above, which is how the city kind of got its name as the City of Stars. So let's look at the player's guide, which should be first and is not in here. Has the introduction, has Raphael will guide him, which talks about Raphael, the immortal, who was in Blackmoor, but I think during the destruction he got turned into an immortal, and he's not even sure how, but he's actually a benevolent dude who's trying to help the Shadow Elves. Their biggest problem is they've been down here cut off from the above world for a really long time. There's the history as the Shadow Elves know it, because a lot of the history that is believed by the Shadow Elves is wrong. They've been taught the wrong stuff by their elders, their shamans and whatnot. There's a section on a day in the life of the Shadow Elves, which is kind of cool because you have different people in the Shadow Elf community stories where they're just going about their daily lives, and it just kind of gives you an overview of well, obviously what life is like with the Shadow Elves, but it's really well written. There's more about the Shadow Elves: creating and playing a Shadow Elf, skills for Shadow Elves, magic among the Shadow Elves, new Shadow Elf spell descriptions, creating and playing a shaman, and Shadow Elf shaman spell descriptions. So you actually have 2 new classes, kinda, that were in here. Remember in the Beckney series, the races weren't divided, so Elf was kind of a class, or was a class. But you have the Shadow Elf class, and you have the Shadow Elf Shaman, which they're kind of like clerics, but not clerics. But it gives you all of that information as far as playing. They have their XP charts and everything, and it's very convertible between this and most of the OSRs that are out there. So whether you're playing Beckme or an OSR or BX or whatever, it's very easy to convert and use any of this stuff because it's all basically the same system. In the Dungeon Master's Guide section, you have the 14 verses of the Refuge of Stone, which are kind of like the laws or the guide to live by that Raphael has in the City of Stars on the Refuge of Stone. And there's even some on there that are invisible to the Shadow Elves. They can't see them. So very few people know about them. There's the time in the history of the Shadow Elves, which tells you what all really happened and what their real history is. The history is the immortals see it, shamans, and the secrets of the soul crystals, which are kind of cool because they have everyone in the Shadow Elf community believes that these soul crystals that they find and they have are the souls of passed on elves, and they draw power from this for magic. The shamans do. But what it really is crystals that are lightly irradiated from this engine alien thing that blew up under Blackmoor, and it's kind of seeped into the ground. So by being around these things, they end up causing deformities to themselves in a respect, mostly to newborns. And if newborns are born with deformities in the Shadow Elf culture, they take the newborn out far away from the city into the wilderness of the underworld, and they basically leave it to die. It's to fend for itself because they don't want the deformities in their community. And then Raphael tends to look after them. And these deformed elves grow up or don't. Most of them get killed, but the ones that survive, they may even fall in with orcs and goblinoids and other underdark or underworld creatures. But the book doesn't focus a whole lot on what happens to them. It goes into it a little bit, but it's specifically more for giving you the Shadow Elf culture and the ability to play a Shadow Elf or a Shadow Elf Shaman. Then we have the Way of the Shaman, the Spells of Radiance, geography of the Shadow Elf lands, and then you have a whole section on the City of Stars, which is their capital city, in that really cool area where the gravity reverses. Encounters the army of the Shadow Elves, and then it goes on about the what everyone knows about the Shadow Elves, flora and fauna among the shadows, Shadow Elves and other lands, adventures in the Shadowlands, and the Shadow Elf character sheet. So it does get its own character sheet in here, which is pretty nifty. I love these old school character sheets. The player section and GM section also clearly divided by the colored paper. This is the player section with this color. See, even the pages are numbered. Actually, this is page 1 of the book, but we're that far in. Or page 1 of that book, anyway. Let's see. What else we got here? So even though they do have some things about them that are strange, like in the way they deal with deformities and the way they deal with the outside world, because they've been misled a lot about the outside world. The elves of Elfheim, or Alfheim, and very few of them have had any dealings with the outside world. However, if they did, if you had a player that wanted to play one, they're almost indistinguishable from regular elves. So they don't look like drow. They're not instantly hated when they come to the surface. In fact, most people, especially non-elven people, aren't going to tell them apart from regular elves. The way that they would really tell them apart is in how naive and gullible they can be, because they're not used to dealing with the people and politics of the surface world, because they think the surface world is, virtually destroyed, only it's not anymore. It's an interesting read. I like it. I will say I like the Dwarves of Rockholm better, just because of some of the detail they gave in it, and I'm a bigger dwarf fan than I am a elf fan, but I still wanted to read it because I knew they were different from the drow, and they're also different from your Tolkien style high elves and wood elves. They were something apart. And I feel like drow to this point have almost become just as mainstream as your high elves and wood elves. So delving into something, an older take on a subset of elves that was off by themselves, to me was a lot of fun, and I really liked it. If I were going to use them in my game, which I may at some point, I'm not going to offer them up as a player character, at least not until my players are more fully understanding of what they are, because they're a great encounter. If you're having an underworld adventure, it'd be great to have your players encounter them, not realizing that they are shadow elves, because they don't know what shadow elves are, but the shadow elves and how they will deal with these interlopers in their area, and though they're not evil, they're going to defend their homes, and who knows, maybe they end up actually bartering and trading, because they do a lot of that too. So there's interesting ways, role-playing wise, that you can introduce the shadow elves into a campaign, but I would highly recommend doing it in a fashion where the players meet some shadow elves, or are put in a situation where they have to help them escape from something, or defend something, or fight something off that's attacking a village. And through the process of that role play, kind of learn that these are not your normal elves. These guys have got some really weird misconceptions about how the world works and how all these races work, and a really strong hatred of the dwarves from Rockholm, because those pesky dwarves will find those gems that are full of elf souls, and now the dwarves will of course sell them back, but the shadow elves will try to take them by force if there's no other choice. The dwarves are more interested in gold anyway. I enjoyed it. I don't know that I would allow any of my character or my players to play a Shadow Elf just because they are so alien to the other classes, because they've been cut off from the surface world for so long. I'm not 100% that I would let them. If I had a real strong role player who wanted to play something like that, like maybe he was an outcast or one of the ones, I just run him as a regular Shadow Elf, I guess, and he could be one of the deformities. Or a Shadow Elf who just left and decided to go out and venture on his own and is having to learn about the world through his experiences because he doesn't really know anything. I think that could be interesting. The art in the book is fantastic. The layout's weird like it is with some of the Gazetteers. I do like that we get 2 new classes if we wanted to use them as players, because the Shamans are really cool. I like the thing about the soul crystals, and the fact that most of the most of the Shadow Elves don't understand what they really are. But it's a great book. It's if you can get it in your collection, I say get it, but then I'm like that about pretty much all the Gazetteers, and there's even a few of them that their theme is something I don't care for. But if I get a chance to get my hands on them, I'm going to, just because the Gazetteer books are so good. I'm not doing it justice. I think you should get it, read through it. It is phenomenal writing. And there is a ton of stuff here that you can cherry pick for your own campaign, or you can set a campaign in the known world. They don't have to go everywhere. I mean, I could set a campaign in Rockholm if I wanted to. It's not like humans don't come to Rockholm, or even elves for that matter, they could have dealings with. But each of these books gives you an area that you could run basically an entire campaign in this area. But then each book is also connected to a larger area. So, again, I love the Gazetteer books. I know some of you guys love the Gazetteer books because we've talked about it in the comments. And if you haven't taken a look at these and you run old school D&D of any type, then you're selling yourself short. You should definitely check these out. I have 4 or 5 or 6 of them up there, and I'm going to eventually get around to all of them, but I'm also trying to at least read through everything, because I didn't own a bunch of these as a kid. I think I owned one of them, and I don't own it now. So there's several of these I always wanted, but I didn't have a lot of money as a kid, so I couldn't just go buy these D&D books. My family wasn't gamers, and my dad viewed it as pretty much a waste of money. However, I'm an adult. I buy what I want to now. Can't nobody stop me. Ha! And if they try to, that dog won't hunt. Anyway, this has been a fun little video to make. Like I said, if you haven't checked out the Gazetteers, check them out. They're really good. This one's really good. I still like the Dwarves of Rockholm better, but like I said, I'm into little hairy men sometimes. That's all I've got on this one for right now. There are some more Gazetteer look at the books coming, and some other look at the books too. Gonna delve into the Buffy role-playing game here soon and start taking a look at some of that. Well, that's all I've got for right now. I hope everybody's enjoyed the video. I hope you found something you could take away from it, even if it was nothing but, having a laugh and listening to me ramble for 23 minutes. Until next time, my friends, good gaming and good luck.